Does there even have to be a hierarchy? Why? Do human beings have to dominate nature? Why?
Welcome to the Greener Grass podcast from BlueBird Botanicals. I'm your host, Lex Pelger. Today we get to enjoy an interview from Dr. Kim Hewitt, who is one of my very favorite academics focusing on the questions and the history around the psychedelic experience. Not only an excellent writer of peer-reviewed research papers, I've also gotten a chance to see her in the classroom, and she's a great teacher as well. We'll hear about what brought her to being a professor of history and culture, and her most recent work around psychedelic feminism. This show is brought to you by BlueBird Botanicals, to spread education about cannabis and other things on the greener side of life. BlueBird CBD oil comes from farms in southern Colorado and is grown using only water, soil, and sunlight. Go to bluebirdbotanicals.com for more info. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show, and I'm very happy to be here with my friend Kim Hewitt. Hi.
Hey.
I guess my first question is, did you always know you wanted to be a historian?
Oh my gosh, no. In fact, I don't actually consider myself a historian. My doctorate is in American Studies, and so I think of myself as a cultural studies person, which in my mind is much sexier than a historian. Sorry, all the historians out there.
Yeah, I just heard Samuel Johnson apparently said, God, don't talk to me about Punic Wars, don't talk to me about history. Give me gossip. That's where the secret is.
Well, because gossip is stories, and stories tell us how people live and what they believe in and, how they structure their lives. And history, when I teach history, because I do have to teach history, I often tell my students, and, most students don't enjoy history, most people don't. And I really believe it's because it's been taught in a way that wasn't any fun, because it's been taught as this timeline. And I tell my students, history is about understanding why things happened the way they did, because they could have happened in a million ways. But why did they happen the way they did happen? And then the rest is all interpretation and telling stories about it. What stories do you want to tell about those events that happened? And how can you support it with evidence? So that would be my version of what history is.
And so when you were younger, do you remember specific pieces of history that first captured your attention like that? Where it's like, wow, this wasn't written in stone. This could have been anything.
Actually, it's interesting. I would say I came to my academic career in two perhaps unusual ways. Actually, I was driving across country when I was maybe 21 and had the good fortune to, have the kinds of adventures you have on road trips, like breaking down and living in somebody's garage for a while the car gets fixed and meeting a lot of different people. And I also fell in love with the land. Colorado is gorgeous. Utah is gorgeous. The California coast is gorgeous. And as I kept meeting people and seeing what amazed me about America, which, it was the people and the immense variety of people and land, I decided to try to figure it out and try to understand it politically, economically, culturally. And that's what brought me to the field of American studies. And then when I got to graduate school, my friend was visiting early on when I was in the master's program. I was in graduate school at the University of Texas in Austin. And I was telling her that I had no idea what I would write my master's thesis on. And we had been talking about how Austin seemed to be a mecca of body modification. And kiddingly, I said to her, maybe I'll write it on tattoos. And that's exactly what I did. Because you can do those kinds of things in cultural studies. Why was tattooing becoming so popular? Why was body modification and piercing becoming not just so popular, but also incredibly creative in the 90s? And so to me, it's a great example of cultural studies and how you can do something interdisciplinary with cultural studies. Combines, some psychology, some anthropology, contemporary ethnography. And I had a blast. And that laid a foundation for me, for my kind of lifelong fascination with the mind-body connection and how people express their spirituality through the mind-body connection and that mystery of consciousness. My early work in understanding body modification, I came to understand the ways people use pain to alter consciousness. Um, and this whole exploration of non-ordinary consciousness through pain and also rituals, and the way people used pain as part of healing rituals. And I would say that, that early work really started laying a foundation for me for my interest in psychedelics and a wider interest in consciousness.
Harnessing the needle to get to that same kind of dissociated state somehow.
Hmm. Right, absolutely. Um, and it's kind of subversive, and it's kind of fun, and it's an exploration, and it's, you know, it definitely on the fringes. Um, Although it's a lot more acceptable now. 20 years later, everybody's got a tattoo.
What was it like to be working on a project like that in the 90s?
Oh, it was fun. Yeah, especially in Austin. Austin was so full of amazing piercing salons and tattooing salons, and people really doing cutting edge, body implants, and very interesting stuff going on then.
And so, what did the final thesis look like? What were you trying to say about the scene and what you found there?
Hmm. So I took a really interdisciplinary approach and kind of folded some psych theory in with theories about initiation rituals. And yeah, kind of, I came to this conclusion that many people who are becoming, like practicing body modification, especially the more extreme forms, were really hungry for initiation rituals. And that it seemed to me to be a signal that there was really something lacking in our society. We had kind of become a really white bread, bland society that did not offer people a lot of role models, especially when it came to spirituality, um, or integrating their entire selves, right? And in a lot of ways, I feel like the rituals that a lot of these people created about, with body modification, were expressing a desire to integrate their whole selves and use their bodies to do that, right? These somatic practices that were bringing them all together. Other societies have been doing this forever. Other societies have initiation rituals where people get scarred, or people get um, tattooed, or various piercings, as part of a way to almost literally bring a human being into being and into that social culture. And in our society, it's a fringe practice because we don't have any socially, we don't have any mainstream rituals to do that.
What's it like to write about this? What's your approach to writing these academic papers after talking to so many people?
Oh, what a nice question. You know, I think of myself as a listener, and there's so many different ways of collecting evidence and creating a story and interpretation. And my favorite way is to listen to people. And that, so for example, the current project I'm working on with women in psychedelics, I think of myself as, my work is to listen and hear what is being told to me, and hear the patterns of what people are saying. Um, and not to judge them, right? It's not that I'm here to say, well, this story is true and that story is true. Oh, what this woman told me is right. It's to hear, how do people create the meaning in their experiences? What do they see? How do they interpret what they're doing? What do they think they're doing? For example, when they go to a psychedelic medicine retreat or take plant medicines. Um, and so again, I feel like that early work really helped me lay a foundation for that, because that's what I did, listening to people about what meaning did they give their tattooing and piercing. And now I'm kind of following that same kind of ethnography, I guess, methodology of what stories are being told to me. What am I just, it's almost like I see myself as an antenna. What am I picking up? I'm just here to pick up all the signals and then see what patterns come out of that.
Is that what enables you to be teaching in so many different directions? Is that the patterns keep reoccurring? Because I'm looking here at the list, just a short list of the classes that you've taught from your CV: Madness in American History, History of the Body, Women's Social History, Violence in American Cinema, which seems especially intriguing, and Post-War America, Sex, Psyche, and Politics. I mean, that's such a wide breadth of what makes up this country, along with all the other classes you taught. And so it really becomes a pattern recognition process.
I'd like to think of it that way. I would unfortunately say with my teaching, it's fairly fragmented because what the academy demands of me is not necessarily it's not necessarily of my choosing. I mean, I've developed, very interesting classes that hopefully fit my interests, but um, they're often dictated by what the university needs me to teach and fill a certain American history requirement. Um, so yeah, maybe I've yet to see some of those bigger patterns with that. Um, you know, yeah.
So you're teaching now at Empire State, and you even have a class on the history of the war on drugs. And I was curious to hear more about what it's like to teach that class in a city that is the cannabis arrest capital of the planet for a while, and of the country still, I believe.
Oh my gosh, that is one of my favorite classes to teach, especially when I teach it at the Brooklyn unit of Empire State College, because I get such a beautiful variety of students who bring such a lovely variety of viewpoints to the class. I literally get students enrolled in the class who confess that they've been drug dealers. I get ex-offenders enrolled in the class. I had a narcotics detective enrolled in the class once. I have people who work in the substance abuse field. I have people who've been addicts, and they all bring this little piece, a little viewpoint to this very broad topic. The war on drugs. What is the role of uh, these supposedly illicit substances in our society, and the very different ways people use them, and the different attitudes about laws, and where, should they be legal? Shouldn't they be legal? How harmful are they? And so that's one of my favorite classes because there's such great discussion. Um, and often it's almost like I don't even have to say anything because, if somebody makes a certain kind of comment about what addiction is, a student who has been addicted to heroin can step up and say, well, let me tell you what it was like for me. And and I think that's what education should be. We all have these amazing experiences to share with each other. And although that's not the only way to learn, it's a really valuable way to learn when it makes it real for students. And they get to actually meet somebody who's worked in narcotics for the New York City Police Department and somebody who works in substance abuse rehabilitating people.
Wow. And so how does this inform your own work to have all of these great sources that actually are coming to you?
That's a good question. I mean, again, I guess I would say I really see one of my abilities is to be able to listen for the whole and synthesize the pieces that are being brought to me, and realize that no one of them is the whole story, but to bring them into conversation with each other, to me, is what a liberal education should be, and also how we all come to a deeper understanding of the world and of each other and what it means to be human.
With that listening, how did your interest in the cultural history of LSD come about?
A few years into graduate school, um, I experienced what for me was just a life-changing event. My older brother was diagnosed bipolar and experienced a tremendous amount of difficulty for a couple years. He was homeless. He was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, and then he killed himself. And for me, my whole world changed. I mean, literally, my whole world fell apart. And I realized I had to dig a lot deeper into understanding consciousness, and specifically what we call normal, right? That he had been diagnosed with a mental illness was one thing. I wasn't really willing to accept a diagnosis as the final word, right? I really wanted to understand, what does that even mean? Because, and as I teach a class in this, what we consider mental illness has changed. It's always changing according to cultural values. And as I spent hours and hours and hours in the library. The University of Texas has a great library, reading everything I could, going back decades in mental health journals. And I began to see in the 1950s all these articles about research with LSD and therapy and mental health and research about schizophrenia and LSD. And these ideas, I became fascinated with this early research. And the more I read, the more I realized, and this was 20 some years ago, it seemed to me there was an untold story of, why did this promising substance that was generating immense amounts of research that seemed to say that LSD assisted therapy could really help people, why did that substance become illegal? And that's what I ended up writing my dissertation on. And it's a funny little story, interesting. So I said that was about 25 years ago. When I sent it off to a publisher at the time, the response I got back, it went out for peer review. And the reviewer, whom I have no idea who it was, it's all blind, basically wrote back and said, this author is biased. She's being too positive. All this can't possibly be true. Where's the dark side? Because we know that psychedelics are very dangerous. So she hasn't done her research. She's only presenting the positive side. And come to find out, some 20 some years later, so much of that early research is getting reconfirmed. That positive side I was showing is exactly what's being researched today, a lot of it. So it's unfortunate. I feel like even that the bias has now changed, which is wonderful. But unfortunately, that dissertation never got published. Because even at the time, I feel like there was a lot of bias against saying, what? These substances aren't. They're just dangerous. They can't possibly be as good as all that research showed.
Wow, never published. What a shame.
Actually, there's another funny story. I don't know if you want to include this in the podcast, but I interviewed for a job at a university in Turkey when I first graduated. And they were initially very excited about my research and this story of drug policy and LSD. And then a student on their campus got busted for LSD. And they literally called me and they said, we're sorry. We just can't hire you. It really would look bad because we just had the student get arrested, and I'm sorry, but no. So I'm just glad I got a job, Thank you, Empire State College, for hiring me.
It's fascinating how personal life led to this story, and you've mentioned before with your brother taking his own life. That's also something that you've heard about in other luminaries of the psychedelic world.
Oh yeah, I was fascinated when I started reading about Aldous Huxley, and he was one of my intellectual heroes. When he was young, I think it was 14, his older brother killed himself. Timothy Leary's first wife killed herself. And I've often wondered, is this one of those events that kind of pushes so many people toward trying to fit themselves into a bigger meaning, like really deeply questioning the meaning of life and why are we here? Why do we suffer? Why do some people choose to end their suffering with death? And can psychedelics help us understand any of that? I don't know, but I do find it really an interesting coincidence that many of these people experienced the suicide of a loved one.
And your work around this was actually, I believe, the first work I ever read from you. Your publication, Rehabilitating LSD History in Post-War America, Dilworth Wayne Woolley and the Serotonin Hypothesis of Mental Illness. Can you talk a little bit about that publication and its importance in neurochemistry and psychedelics?
Oh, thank you so much for mentioning that. Yeah, I spent some time up at the Rockefeller um, Center Archives in Tarrytown, New York, because there was a chemist who had worked there in the 50s and early 60s who, this is before psychotropic drugs were popular, right? We just began to use them in the late 50s in America, and nobody really understood the biochemistry of mental illness. Of course, we still don't. But at the time, we had many wacky theories about what mental illness was. And Dilworth Wayne Woolley, this incredibly promising chemist, began realizing, simply looking at molecular structures, that the LSD molecule was very similar to the serotonin molecule. And he made that connection. And very early, 1962, I believe it was, well, that's when he published a book. He published his first papers in the late 50s, proposed a theory that mental illness was a serotonin dysfunction. And he realized that by looking at the molecule of LSD and saying, wow, well, if that can change somebody's consciousness, this other molecule that looks very similar, serotonin, maybe that has something to do with mental illness. And it really was one of the very early biochemical theories about mental illness, and has gotten very little attention. I mean, I was glad to publish a small paper about it because he was quite a smart chemist. He died in 1966, and maybe that's why there wasn't much more written about him, but his research definitely sparked some other research. And it's a time period when the field of biochemistry was growing. And of course, out of that comes psychopharmacology. And you can draw a direct line, literally, from his research up through biochemical theories to the development of Prozac. So it's interesting to think of that little role LSD plays in that history of psychopharmacology.
Can you tell us more about your new publication, Psychedelic Feminism, a radical approach to psychedelic consciousness? Question mark.
Yeah. Several years ago, I began reading some various French feminism theory and publications. And as I read their descriptions of feminism, because it's a very, very different view than American feminism, in the back of my mind, it was almost like this little voice just kept saying, wow, they are describing the psychedelic realm. This all embracing realm, a symbolic realm, not based on gender, right? Not based on this is what women are and this is what men are, but a way they describe the world as feminine is everything that's been excluded from our modern society, and what ecofeminists and some of the early French feminists would call the logic of domination. Um, and instead embracing what would otherwise be labeled irrational, embracing emotional, embracing intuitive, embracing fluidity, embracing the mystery of not knowing. As opposed to a logic of domination in the Western world and the modern capitalist world that says, well, we value efficiency and linearity and hierarchy and production. We want an outcome. We want to see that it's rational and empirical. And I thought about this for a long time before I started writing about it, because I really felt like it spoke to a core of many psychedelic experiences that, again, I feel like people are hungering for in their lives. I feel that people almost instinctively realize that logic of domination is not nurturing us. And in fact, it is excluding people and it's detrimental.
It's fascinating to hear about the French ideas on feminism. I was wondering if you could give a small summary of the other two major threads of feminism you talk about as in the context of a psychedelic feminism: ecofeminism and third wave feminism.
Hmm. Yes. And I need to bring that up to answer your question, to kind of explain a little bit about how that wraps into psychedelic feminism. So these ideas of this French feminists about the symbolic meanings of feminism knit together with ecofeminism, which talks about our connection with nature as one of the most fundamental ways that the logic of domination has separated us, right? That it's separated us from nature. And that deep down, if we can reconnect with nature, we're reconnecting with the nature of ourselves and literally the wild within us, right? And again, all the stuff that, we've excluded. And actually, to bring mental illness back in, right? This is almost what's at the core of diagnosis. What is normal? Well, normal is rational. Normal is consensus reality. And if you don't fit in, maybe you're diagnosed schizophrenic. So to get back in touch with a certain wildness, right, that reconnects us to nature and beyond is a core of ecofeminism. Third wave feminism is also just less ideologically rigid than kind of second wave feminism. They're willing to be more fluid. They're willing to be more, embrace contradictions and embrace multiple identities and make room for questions that can't even really be answered about identity and how, quote, the world should be, right? Maybe there is no one way the world should be. Maybe there are stories people tell. And so third wave feminism also embraces personal narrative as a way to avoid duality, right? Why split the world into here's right, here's wrong, when really all we have are experiences? And I would say this is the core of psychedelic feminism, right? It's a term that a woman named Zoe Helen coined, and she founded an organization called Cosmic Sister to specifically fund women to go to Peru to embark on ayahuasca retreats. And she uses the term psychedelic feminism to talk about how psychedelic work empowers women. And I think that's absolutely correct. And I was really interested in expanding that idea. Like, okay, that's great. Now let's talk about how it empowers women. Like, what are women saying about how it empowers them? What are their stories? And so I wanted to draw a thread between these kinds of feminism and really flesh out what psychedelic feminism could be and is developing into.
So you jumped in and started listening.
So I started listening. Yeah. And the more I listened, I realized that I do feel like my initial impulse was correct. I mean, I'm not done my research yet, right? It's still evolving. And yet, this idea that it's really not gender based, there may be unique ways women work with psychedelic substances and unique pieces, especially if it's an all women's retreat, which was where I initially started. And yet, I feel like an awful lot of men are also empowered when they work with psychedelics and experience very similar um, kinds of consciousness and enter into these different ways of being. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with Bill Richards' work. You know, when somebody has an experience of unitive consciousness and feels that interconnection, that's not based in gender. That helps shift a whole worldview. Or as one of the women I interviewed said, Once you've seen behind the veil and seen that we're all connected, there is no going back. And I feel like that's a very important shift, which is a core of all psychedelic experiences. And I would even say psychedelic feminism is the core of a psychedelic experience, which is not to say that everybody who, works with a psychedelic substance is going to have a certain kind of experience. And yet the possibility exists.
So it's more the idea that the core of psychedelic experience is feminine for its openness as an idea, as a feeling, archetype.
Yes, openness would be a lovely way to put it, right? It's that openness and fluidity and questioning of many of the values that we've taken for granted. Does there even have to be a hierarchy? Why? Do human beings have to dominate nature? Why? Do we have to value human life above the environment? If you begin to feel interrelated, I think you begin questioning all of these things that are kind of the machine our society runs on. And so, to me, psychedelic feminism is also an intense challenge to the patriarchy. And again, I don't say that as a masculine, it's not about men versus women. It's about a system that has created these divisions and a deep value system that I feel we are beginning to question. I feel many people are beginning to question that value system these days and realize, if we don't value the earth, if we don't value relationships and connections with other human beings and all things, we've gone astray and we're destroying ourselves.
It's the one hard part of it for me is it seems like the same kind of hierarchies and patterns build up around the psychedelic world, whether it be in the depths of a jungle or in the boudoirs of Seattle or New York, and you still have this kind of ugliness that floats around next to any piece of power. And I know one old tripper said, "Yeah, if you're an asshole and you take psychedelics, it allows you to be a psychedelic asshole."
Right, right. Well, and psychedelic substances are very complicated. They're not Western medicines that solve a certain physiological condition or problem. They're, of course, very related to what is the intention with which they're taken, what is the context, and how does somebody take that experience and put it into practice, right? It's one thing for anybody to say, oh, I had this great psychedelic experience. I worked with plant medicines and I understood, my place in the cosmos. Okay, cool. And what are you going to do with that? Right? How are you going to work to make the world a better place with that revelation? I was just reading this morning this great essay by Jay Sevilius in shakruna.net about social justice. How do all these psychedelic experiences translate into social justice, right? How does it help people question what's being left out, who's being left out? How does it help people re-envision beyond themselves? And actually, that's maybe my next section of my research. The idea of the experience of an expanded self is really common in a psychedelic experience. Okay, how do people put that into practice in their daily lives when they transcend their own individual ego? It might feel great, might not, but what matters is how do they put it into practice the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year to re-envision a world that is interconnected. And for me, this is also a spiritual question. And many of the women I've interviewed emphasize that their work with psychedelics is often within a spiritual context, right? They want to grow personally and they want to grow spiritually.
What did you learn as you talked to different women about women only psychedelic experiences and how they felt differently and how the rituals went and what it was like.
Oh my gosh, so many things. Yeah, it's been fascinating talking to women, and then uh, my own participation also in a lot of these retreats and ceremonies. Again, it's not wholly different from how men do this, and I would love to embark on, how in the world can I get a little view of men's retreats? I'd love that. Um, but many women do seem to say, I guess, two factors at least seem to be a bit unique. That many women feel a need for safe space for women. And unfortunately, yes, there are people, whether they be, in the US or in other countries, that use the vulnerability of a psychedelic experience and their power as a facilitator to impose themselves on women, right? And there have been cases of sexual abuse and, daunting stories. We don't really know how widespread it is, but it's, even if it's only once or twice, it's too much. And so when women are with only other women, they often feel that they are in a safer space, um, and so can go deeper into their own work. And that's one valuable piece for many women. Secondly, a lot of women and facilitators often talk about a playfulness that women seem to bring to the sphere. That when it's only women, they often find it more, the whole retreat is more spontaneous and more fluid and more intuitive, actually. They may have a certain agenda laid out, but it just doesn't happen that way. It's they've learned to just go with the flow. And again, I don't know how different that is from men only retreats, because I don't know if it's a gender based thing. I just know what people have told me.
We're using the terms men and women here, and what about for the queer folks who find themselves somewhere on a sliding scale between or on a different scale entirely? How have you
Hmm.
seen those complexities of gender and sexuality embraced by these spots where they're trying to create a safe container, but also, I'm sure, want to be open and open-minded?
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, another great question. And I really wish there was more attention to this question in the psychedelic community and in psychedelic research. Um, I have, unfortunately, I have not interviewed a lot of either non-binary people or, most of the people I've interviewed identify as straight women. And I will add straight, white, middle class women. Um, and I feel like there is so much more work to be done with other, I think all these identities are fluid, and we're beginning to recognize that in society. And I wish there was more attention paid to how is work being done by other individuals who have other identities. I will admit I don't know a ton about that. I haven't gotten to that yet. I hope I do. I hope I can.
Yeah, I fear it's another blind spot out there of the
Hmm.
psychedelic community where we could be more
Hmm.
open and do things.
Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking the other day about William Burroughs' Yahe letters when he went to Peru and drank ayahuasca, and he talks about turning into other races and other genders in his ayahuasca experience. And again, a psychedelic experience has the potential to break down all those dualities, and I think it's a rich area that we can all learn a lot from.
What did the women say about the lessons they take away and the way they, um, as you said earlier, the Houston Smith quote fits well. Of we're not looking for a bright flash of illumination. We're looking for a steady abiding candle of
Hmm.
light. And so, what kind of lessons did you
Hmm.
hear that people really got a chance to bring home and fundamentally change how they were living?
Hmm. would say one of the biggest pieces is that so many women, through their work with psychedelic substances, and it's a whole variety, right? I was really looking at a broad spectrum of ayahuasca, LSD, MDMA, right? I understand that is in some ways problematic because they are different substances, and yet a lot of the work is often similar. And a lot of women talk about being empowered as women. And again, I don't think this is necessarily unique to women. I don't think it's a gender thing. And yet I do think it's particularly important for anybody, women or other people who have not felt empowered in their lives, right? That live in a culture that has not handed them, a high place in the power structure. So I've heard amazing stories. I mean, literally, it may sound like a small shift, but women who say, you know, I had this experience and I kept working with it, and I felt more confident in myself and my own ability to find answers within myself and listen to my inner voice and my own intuition. And I stopped being so afraid of my ex husband. I was finally able to stand up to him, maybe about a child custody issue, um, or selling the house. And I'm thrilled that I hear these stories of how women put these lessons into practice in their daily lives, that it makes a difference for them in their relationships, at their jobs, with their families, that they feel they can be more authentic and feel bigger, feel they are, more able to make their own way in the world and create their own realities. It's a big thing for a lot of women I speak with.
And is one of the really important points I feel like comes out of your publication is the dearth of representation of women as psychedelic explorers instead of being
Hmm.
the good girls gone bad or trivializing it. There just aren't that many great books out there about all of these amazing female writers and artists pushing the envelope. Um,
Hmm.
and
And doing research and taking part as healers and pioneers of exploration. Indeed.
And in fact, if someone was listening, wanted to learn more, do you have a couple of favorite books that you would recommend for people who want to learn more about women in psychedelics and the history?
One book I've loved is called Sisters of the Extreme. I don't remember the editors offhand, but it's a kind of compendium of women's experiences. Um, not thinking of anything else offhand. Uh, there's another book called Daughters of Aquarius, which is about women in the 60s, which again, you'd think there would be a lot more attention paid to the countercultural women in the 60s, but there's not even that much attention paid to them. It really signals how how women's stories have been left out of history.
Yeah, especially the Women of the Extremes book is just because it's simply the writings from the women is what I feel like makes it so
Hmm.
powerful. And
Right.
thinkers like Anne Shulgin and Kat Harrison, uh, they're better, deeper thinkers on this stuff than almost anybody out there. Certainly the people are on stage all the time. And a lot of the researchers doing the very
Hmm.
basic research. That it's not the right
Hmm.
mindset for this, and something about that, not female but feminine mindset around this. I mean, it does make sense what you're saying, and I feel it.
Well, I would also add, I am all for the amazing research that is being done now at Johns Hopkins and NYU. And, it's very important to get empirical evidence to convince the medical establishment and convince the mainstream that these are valuable substances, when used carefully. And yet, I also feel there's a really important voice to be heard in the underground. And it's a difficult voice to record because, it's still illegal to work with these substances in the US. By nature, you have to be I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get IRB approval. Of course, I want to maintain privacy and confidentiality for all the women I interview. And yet, it's almost as if those voices from the underground have the freedom to do and say whatever they want because there are no strictures of the institution, right? And, even I have found it a bit frustrating, some of the methodology I've had to stick within the protocols. I feel that pressure of the patriarchy. Like, here's how you have to do your research in order for it to be considered respectable. Um, and that's fine. But there's a whole world out there in the underground that is experimenting and going into realms and producing amazing amounts of narratives, and we can learn so much from that, in addition to all the empirical valid institutionally sponsored research.
That was one of the last questions I wanted to ask was if we could get you an IRB approval for anything and a nice healthy grant for travel, where would you most like to be able to get access to? For your next round of research, what kind of communities and spots would you like to see where people are gathering?
Um, wow. I think in my wildest dreams, I would go to Mongolia. I would love to see how women shaman in Mongolia are doing their work. Because I think also cross-cultural is very important. And there are a lot of questions, certainly, especially working with plant medicines. How are they being adopted and adapted into the U.S.? Are they being appropriated? Are they being used respectfully? Are other traditions being viewed respectfully? It's a very important issue. And cross-cultural research is really important. So yeah, I would love to be able to do more traveling outside the U.S., as well as continue looking at the underground in the U.S., because I feel like there's a ton of valuable, interesting stuff going on here.
Yeah, it must be fascinating to see the scenes that you got to see during this research. I really appreciate in your article that you included a run through of what a true psychedelic feminist retreat looked like and what people went through there. And I was curious about kind of the array of psychoactives that were there. What did you see the most of in terms of what resonated with the people you were interviewing?
Um, I have a theory that different people really do resonate with different substances. For some people, it's mushrooms, and they take mushrooms in their home. I learned this early on as I was learning about substances. There are people who the first time they do heroin, they say, I felt right. For the first time in my life, I felt right. And clearly there's something about their physiology, their psychology, their spirituality, it's mysterious. They have a certain kinship with that substance, right? And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm simply saying people often recognize, right? They have a flash of recognition. For some people it's LSD. For some people it's mushrooms. For some people it's ecstasy or MDMA. For some people it's ayahuasca. Other people drink ayahuasca, nothing happens. And they say, it's not my thing. It's not my plant to work with. So my theory is that it's really different for everybody, and people have different resonances. That's a really good word for it.
There's a theory by the drug writer Victor Pelevin. Not so much a theory, it's just a line he threw out because he's a crazy drug writer, that your first experience of drugs and sex will forever flavor the rest. And so whenever it goes right that first time, you'll never forget, and you always kind of want to repeat that one forever.
Yeah, there's something about humans, their neurology does tend to imprint certain things. Although it's a bit mysterious why certain people imprint certain things and other people don't. I've been reading a ton about trauma also to understand, because a lot of the psychedelic work, people find it very valuable for healing trauma, past trauma. And it's super interesting to find that some people can have experiences that made a deep, deep impression on them, and other people have similar experiences, and it really makes very little impression. So I feel it's always really important to keep a kind of psychocultural biological model in mind, that it's never one factor. It's never just biology. It's never just psychology. It's never just the cultural moment. It's the interplay between all of those things, the dialogue that happens. And we can throw in spirituality also, certainly.
And to what you were saying about trauma, it's one of my fears for the community. And as these events grow and as more underground therapists set up with or without training, is the screening for trauma. Because I do think it's very true these can be so powerful for trauma, but for very deep trauma, you need someone who knows how to hold that space. And to have someone show up at a ceremony can be so damaging. Did you see much in the way of pre-screening and watching for that and trying to make sure everyone's the psychotropic medicines they're already taking were okay, and that their mental state was okay?
Oh, I think you are absolutely right to point out that this is important, and especially in the underground, I feel some people are more diligent than others. And another book that's been very influential for me was Rachel Harris's Listening to Ayahuasca, and she describes some concerns about the work really nicely. It is important to work in a context where certainly the facilitators are experienced, know what they're doing, know the risks involved, because of course there are risks. Just like there are risks with psychotherapy, just like there are risks with any medical procedure, there are risks with psychedelic work. And those questions about what medications are you on, can there be interactions, what is your past history of trauma, what are you working with, what's your spiritual practice? That's a really important one. Do you have a practice that can support you as you integrate this work into your life? Do you have a community that can support you as you move forward and try to incorporate this work into your life? Those are really important questions.
Yeah, and they really speak to the need for wise access to these drugs. I don't know, I was wondering if you had any theories for if you were put in charge of how these things might be allowed to be distributed, if you'd have any thoughts on the rules and regulations of psychedelics in a sane society. If you were allowed to be put in charge of Huxley's Island, if you had any ideas how it would look.
Mm-hmm. That is not actually something I've thought through yet, simply because I haven't come to my own conclusions yet about any kind of end point. Maybe there is an end point. I don't know. I'm not even wholly convinced the world's going to continue as it as it is in the next few decades, and maybe that's okay. I like the idea of an awakening consciousness and people becoming aware of their interconnection, and really the importance of choosing to move through the world from a place of love. And yet, I'm one puny little human here. What in the world would make me think I know the answer? I don't know. I hope the collective voice can come up with something wise.
Excellent answer. And so for the last question, if the world does keep continuing on decently for a couple decades, what strands of research are you most excited about pursuing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to continue with looking at how women work with psychedelic substances for personal and spiritual growth. I would love to expand that to men, so I can see how the stories compare. I would like to dig deeper into literally the creation of consciousness and how consciousness is enculturated. Um, Again, my interest in individuals changing their worldview and their consciousness is linked to how is that going to play out on a cultural level. I'm all for individuals awakening, and yet I feel it's really important for us to not stop there. I feel it's important for us to start re-envisioning what world do we want to create? What world do we want to live in? So again, I don't think I have the answer, but I think it's important for us as a we and as a collaboration to start really carefully considering how do we move forward and re-envision a world in which we're all interconnected and care about each other and the earth.
Amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and talking about more about your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to say thank you. It's so nice to have somebody interested and asking great questions and listening. So thank you.
All right. Dr. Kim Hewitt, you can find the work online, and we'll put some links to the best stuff that we can in the episode notes. And thank you so much for your work and for talking with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Greener Grass is a BlueBird Botanicals podcast. Their CBD oil supports a healthy body and a strong endocannabinoid system. They've got friendly customer service who can answer any of your questions, and the number is right there at the top of their webpage. But, per the FDA, they won't be able to make any medical claims for these nutritional supplements. That's also the reason you'll hear little about CBD on this show. There's no need for us to add more evidence about CBD when a simple Google search will give you more than you can read in a month of Sundays. So this show covers the cannabis world and more with editorial freedom from BlueBird Botanicals. Thanks for joining the Greener Grass podcast. As always, our audio alchemist is Matt Payne. The Gypsy Jazz theme music comes from Brett Van Donsel. Our beautiful bird sounds are courtesy of Lang Elliott. And I'm your host, Lex Pelger, wishing you a bright green day.